Welcome back to the archive. Open the journal to entry number 2. The pages here feel gritty to the touch, stained with the dust of an ancient landscape, reshaped by the winds of time. Before we begin tonight's observation, take a moment to settle yourself. Just as the dust settles after a desert storm, let your body find its stillness. The history books of your world are closed. The worries of your waking hours are drifting away. There is nothing left for you to manage, and nothing you need to remember. You are simply here, observing. Tonight, the journal takes us far, from the green forests of the leaf and the mist of the hidden villages. We are traveling back hundreds of years before the founding of the 5 great nations, back to a time before ninjutsu was an art, before it even had a name. We find ourselves standing in the vast, silent expanse of the land of wind. The air here is dry and thin, tasting of salt and old stone. The oppressive heat of the day has faded into the profound, deep cold of the desert night. Above us, the sky is incredibly clear, unmarred by the glow of civilization. The stars look different here, sharper, closer, like a tapestry of silver light, stretching over an endless, undulating horizon of sand. The dunes around us are massive, like frozen waves of gold and rust, sculpted by winds that have blown for millennia. Listen closely to the silence. You can hear the desert moving, a soft, consistent hiss as millions of grains of sand slide over one another in the dark. It is a hypnotic, rhythmic sound. It is the sound of deep time. Breathe in the cool, dry air. Let the vast emptiness of this place wash over you. There is so much space here, so much quiet. In this era, the world was a much noisier, more dangerous place. The great hidden villages did not exist. There were no Karsh to keep the peace, and no headbands bearing symbols of allegiance. It was the era of warring states, a time when humanity was fractured into small, desperate clans, huddled together for survival. Life was a relentless cycle of petty battles, fought over water, food, and territory. Chakra was known, but it was misunderstood and unrefined. There were no complex hand signs, no grand jutsu that could reshape landscapes. Instead, chakra was primitive, a raw, untamed energy used for basic survival, like strengthening a limb for labor or lighting a small fire to survive the freezing night. People feared power in this time, and they feared nothing more than the great beasts. In these days, the tailed beasts roam the earth as natural disasters, walking storms of flesh, spirit, and malice. If the 9 tails stirred in the distant forests, it was viewed as a divine punishment. Here, in the endless dunes, the sand belonged entirely to the one tail, Shukaku. The people of the desert did not speak its name above a whisper. They believed that when sandstorms rose to swallow the sky, it was merely the great Tanuki shifting in its sleep, indifferent to the lives it extinguished. The journal entry tonight is not about those wars, nor is it about that fear. It is about the first person who looked at that terror and decided to hold it. His name was Arahari. I first observed Arahari walking alone in the deep desert, far beyond the borders where even the most desperate travelers dared to go. He was not a warrior. He carried no blade, but was dressed in the rough-spun robes of a wandering monk, bleached white by a lifetime under the relentless sun. His feet were bare against the cooling sand, and his eyes held a profound, quiet weariness, the kind of tired that comes from watching a world burn itself for decades. Arahari had grown tired of the noise of conflict. In that exhaustion, he sought a silence that the human world could not provide, while others fled in terror from the legends of the tailed beasts. Arahari was drawn toward them. He did not see a monster in the Shukaku. He saw a force of nature, a pure and untainted energy that predated the petty squabbles of man. He walked past the last markers of civilization until the only sound left in the world was the rhythm of his own breath and the shifting of the dunes. He was looking for the eye of the storm. He carried only a small gourd of water and a heavy amulet carved from black volcanic stone, hanging from a simple cord. Arahari belonged to a forgotten sect of monks who practiced an early, inward form of meditation. They did not use chakra to fight outward. They used it to create a perfect, glass-like stillness within the soul. The further Arahari walked, the more the desert seemed to transform. The dunes were no longer gold. They had turned to a deep, bruised purple under the starlight, and the sand felt heavier, as if it were laden with iron. He had reached the Valley of Whispering Sands, a place where the air itself seemed to vibrate with a low, constant hum. This was the heart of the One-Tail's territory. The pressure here was immense. It was not a physical weight, but a spiritual one. It felt like standing at the base of a mountain. That was breathing. Arahari did not stop. He did not let his heart beat faster. He simply continued his slow, rhythmic pace until he found a jagged formation of obsidian rising from the dunes, like a splinter of the night sky itself. He sat upon the cold stone, crossing his legs and resting his hands upon his knees. He closed his eyes. Let us observe him now as he begins the work. He started with the breath. Inhale for a count of 4, hold, and exhale for a count of 4. This was the foundation of his sect's power. It was not about gathering energy to strike. It was about aligning the rhythm of the body with the rhythm of the world. As he breathed, he visualized his chakra, not as a swirling storm, but as a perfectly still pond within his chest. He imagined the surface of that pond as a mirror, dark and deep. Every thought of the world he left behind, every memory of the smoke and the shouting of the warring states, he allowed it to sink to the bottom. He watched as the ripples on the water slowed, and eventually he vanished. He was creating a perfect, internal silence. There is nothing for you to do now, except to follow that breath. Like Arahari, let the world around you dissolve. The obsidian stone beneath him was freezing, but he did not feel it. The desert wind was biting, but he did not shiver. He was no longer a man of flesh and bone. He was becoming a part of the landscape. For hours, he sat in that absolute stillness. The stars moved across the sky in their slow, ancient dance. The sand began to pile up around his legs. threatening to bury him where he sat. But Arahari did not move. He was waiting. He was projecting his stillness outward, like a beacon in the dark. He was not looking for the Shukaku with his eyes. He was looking for it with his silence. Then, the earth began to tremble. It was a deep, resonant vibration that started in the very center of the earth and moved up through the obsidian stone and into his spine. It was a magnetic pull, a weight so heavy it felt as if the moon itself had descended into the valley. The sand began to swirl, not in a chaotic storm, but in a deliberate, circling motion around the monk. It rose up like a great, golden serpent, reaching high into the starlight. The air became thick with the scent of ozone and ancient dust. A voice, if it could be called a voice, echoed through the valley. It did not come from a throat. It came from the grinding of the rocks and the whistling of the wind. Why, little speck, do you bring such silence to my home? Arahari did not open his eyes. He did not break the rhythm of his breath. He simply allowed his internal mirror to reflect the question back into the void. Because the world is too loud, he whispered in his mind, and I have come, finally, to listen. The vibration grew stronger. The very air seemed to thicken as the one tail manifested its consciousness. It was a presence older than the clans, a power that did not understand the concept of time. It looked at the tiny monk, and for the first time in an eternity, it felt a curiosity. The sand settled, forming the shape of a massive, clawed hand that hovered just inches above Arahari's head. The heat radiating from it was like a forge. You would house a god in a vessel of clay. The presence rumbled. Arahari smiled. A tiny, peaceful movement of the lips. The clay is temporary, he thought, but the silence is eternal. Let us leave them there for a moment, in that tense, quiet negotiation between the mortal and the infinite. The desert is wide, and the night is long. There is plenty of time for the story to unfold. Close your eyes and feel the sand shifting. Feel the weight of the stars. You are safe in the observer's care. The ritual did not begin with a shout or a flash of light. It began with a surrender. The hand of sand lowered until it rested completely upon Arahari's head. It was heavy and agonizingly hot, like the weight of the noonday sun compressed into a single point. Arahari reached up with a trembling hand and gripped the black volcanic stone hanging at his chest. He did not pray. He did not beg. He simply began to pour his internal silence into the stone. The amulet began to glow, not with a bright light, but with a deep, pulsing violet hue, the color of the desert just before dawn. This was the first seal, a primitive anchor designed to tether the infinite to the finite. Then, the sand began to enter him. It was a sensation unlike anything a mortal was ever meant to feel. It felt as if his veins were being filled with liquid glass, and his bones were being turned into the very obsidian he sat upon. The chakra of the one tail did not flow like water. It ground against his spirit like a millstone, abrasive ancient and chaotic. Arahari's breathing slowed until it was almost non-existent. He had to become as hollow as a reed, as still as the horizon. If he resisted, the power would shatter him. If he feared, the chaos would consume him. He retreated deeper into the mirror of his mind. He watched the Shukaku's rage, 1,000 years of being a storm, as it poured into his tiny, human heart. He did not try to tame the rage. He simply reflected it. "You are the desert," he whispered in the silence of his soul. "And I am the vessel that holds the sand." The sand swirling around him grew into a towering pillar, a golden shroud that cut off the starlight. Inside that cocoon, the monk and the beast were becoming one. The markings on the Shukaku's body, those strange, flowing blue lines, began to crawl up Arahari's arms, etching themselves into his skin like permanent shadows. It was a marriage of stone and spirit. The pain was immense, but Arahari observed it from a distance, as if it were happening to someone else. He felt his lungs expand with the weight of the earth. He felt his vision blur, replaced by 1,000 eyes looking out from every grain of sand in the valley. For the first time, a human saw the world as the Ichibi saw it. He saw the slow, agonizing crawl of the tectonic plate. He felt the vibration of a beetle's wings 10 miles away. He understood the loneliness of a mountain. And then, the silence returned. The golden pillar collapsed, falling away like a discarded robe. The valley was still once more. The obsidian stone was cracked, glowing with a faint, residual heat. Arahari sat alone in the center of the dust. He looked down at his hands. They were stained with the blue markings of the beast, a brand that would never fade. He was no longer just a monk. He was the first anchor, the first Jinchuriki. He stood up, but he did not feel his own weight. He felt the weight of the desert. He took a single step, and the sand beneath his feet rose up to meet him, shifting in perfect rhythm with his stride. The desert no longer belonged to the Shukaku, and the Shukaku no longer belonged to the wind. They belonged to each other. Let us watch as he begins the long walk back toward a world that has no idea what he has done. He carries the storm within him now, a quiet, sleeping god tucked away behind a wall of meditation. The night is ending. The first light of dawn is beginning to touch the peaks of the distant mountains. Our observation of this entry is nearing its close. Breathe with Arahari one last time. Feel the stillness of the sand. Feel the warmth of the seal. You are resting now, deep within the archive, safe from the storms of the world. Days passed as Arahari walked, the blue markings on his skin hidden beneath his tattered robes. The desert was no longer an enemy. It was an extension of his own body. When he finally reached the edge of a small settlement, a cluster of mud brick houses huddled around a dying well, he felt the noise of humanity before he saw it. It was a discordant sound, a sharp, jagged frequency of fear, hunger, and greed. To his new senses, the village felt like a wound in the silence. Inside his mind, the Shukaku stirred. The beast did not like the smell of men. It did not like the narrowness of their lives. Arahari felt a surge of ancient malice rise up from his gut, a desire to let the sand rise up and swallow the houses whole. The sand at his feet began to churn, a tiny whirlwind forming around his ankles. Arahari did not panic. He simply returned to the mirror. He breathed, pulling the beast's anger into his internal pond, watching as the ripples were absorbed by his own quiet resolve. He was no longer just a monk. He was a jailer. He was the barrier between a god's rage and the fragile lives of men. He walked into the village center. The people stopped their work, their eyes widening as he passed. They did not see the markings, but they felt the weight. They felt the air grow heavy and the temperature drop. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts, and the village elders gripped their canes with white knuckles. Arahari reached the well. He looked down into the dark, dry hole. He placed a hand upon the parched earth, and for a moment, he allowed a single drop of the beast's power to leak through the seal. He did not use it to destroy. He used it to search. He felt the deep, hidden veins of the earth. He felt the water trapped beneath layers of ancient stone. With a subtle flex of his will, he commanded the earth to move. The ground groaned, a deep, rhythmic sound that vibrated through the feet of every person standing there. A moment later, a cool, clear stream of water began to bubble up from the depths, filling the well to the brim. The villagers gasped, some falling to their knees in gratitude. They began to shout, to cheer, to reach out and touch the hem of his robe. They called him a miracle worker, a savior, a saint. But Arahari only felt the weariness. He saw the greed in their eyes, the way they already looked at the water as something to be sold, something to be fought over. The beast inside laughed, a dry, scratching sound in the back of his mind. They are but dust, the Shukaku whispered. Why do you serve the dust? Arahari did not answer. He simply turned and walked back into the desert. He realized then that he could never truly live among them again. To be a Jinchuriki was to be a bridge that both sides would always try to burn. He would spend the rest of his years in the high dunes, a lonely observer of a world that would never understand the price he paid for its peace. He would be the first of many, the beginning of a lineage of vessels who would carry the storms of the world within their own hearts. The sun is setting now over the archive. The story of the first vessel is recorded, and the journal is ready to be closed. Let the desert wind fade into the background of your mind. Let the blue markings and the golden sand dissolve into the darkness of your room. You have traveled far tonight. You have observed the birth of a legend. And now, it is time for the legend to rest. The archive remains open for those who seek the quiet. But for now, the entry is complete. Breathe, rest, and listen to the silence that remains. Good night, observer.